Welcome, welcome, welcome. Homie, you know what? They've been running diagnostics on you. Whispering your name in private conversations, trying to piece together why nothing about you fits their logic. They see you walk into places they swore you'd never reach, move with discipline they can't mimic, and recover from pain they thought would cripple you. What they don't get is, your energy isn't reactionary. You don't operate off what's given. You create new reference points wherever you go. People around you are still decoding basic emotions while you're rewriting the frequency of the entire environment. You carry a kind of calm that unnerves people who need noise to feel alive. You carry a kind of focus that feels like confrontation to those who depend on chaos to hide their weakness. You've got 5 traits that make you unreadable, unstoppable, and unforgettable. And every one of them is a paradox wrapped in discipline. The first is strategic unpredictability. You've learned the science of never letting anyone map you. One moment you're quiet, observing. The next, you're executing moves that shift the dynamic of entire circles. You're unpredictable not because you're reckless, but because you operate from depth. You think 10 moves ahead, but reveal only 1. You've built a rhythm that confuses imitators. They can copy your surface, but never your sequence. You understand timing like a weapon, when to disappear to make them desperate, when to reappear to remind them why they feared your absence. This unpredictability breaks hierarchies without confrontation. It turns your existence into a study of control. People realize too late that every time they tried to read you, they gave away their own strategy. You've become the test they keep failing. Your second trait is emotional composure under chaos. You've mastered restraint in a generation addicted to reaction. When others panic, you pause. When others overshare, you calculate. You've made peace look militant. They throw shade. You turn it into shadow to rest in. They gossip. You turn it into fuel for focus. Every attempt to provoke you becomes a mirror reflecting their lack of discipline. They want you loud because your stillness exposes their instability. You've made neutrality feel like dominance, and that confuses every attention seeker around you. People can't understand how someone can be both present and untouchable at the same time. That's because you're not chasing acknowledgement. You're refining awareness. You read micro-expressions like data. You feel energy shifts before words form. And by the time anyone realizes what you've perceived, you've already adjusted the field. That's why the room feels heavier when you enter. It's not intimidation. It's calibration. The third trait, ruthless self-awareness. Most people know what they want. You know who you are. You've done the dark homework others avoid. You've confronted your triggers, dissected your ego, cataloged your patterns. You don't run from your flaws. You repurpose them. That's why emotional manipulators can't trap you. You already met your shadows in person and made them your guards. Every scar became a sensor. Every mistake became a manual. You know exactly where you end and where your standards begin. Which is why no one can guilt you for outgrowing them. You've reached the point where reflection became armor. You're no longer seeking validation. You're verifying vibration. And when you speak, it's not conversation, it's confirmation. That level of self-awareness dismantles people who rely on confusion to maintain control. They can't gaslight clarity. Your fourth trait is selective intensity. You don't waste fire, you conserve it. When others scatter their passion, trying to prove relevance, you aim yours with precision. Your effort is lethal because it's rare. You don't speak often, but when you do, The room adjusts its breathing. You don't move frequently, but when you move, trajectories shift. People mistake your quiet for passivity until they see what happens when you decide something matters. That's when your energy becomes execution. You pour so much concentrated focus into one decision that it feels supernatural. That's why they can't compete. Your intensity is strategic, not emotional. You understand that focus is currency, and you spend it like a king who already owns the throne. The fifth trait, the one that breaks them completely, is authentic dominance. Not forced, not loud, not arrogant, authentic. You don't dominate by demanding, you dominate by demonstrating. You've aligned your inner world so precisely that outer chaos bends around it. Your walk carries evidence, your eyes carry history, your tone carries law. You've integrated power so deeply that people feel leadership even when you say nothing. And that's the paradox. They try to challenge you, but end up following your rhythm. They try to compete, but end up mirroring your pace. You've become the standard by simply existing in alignment. Authentic dominance isn't about being above others. It's about being beyond imitation. You've evolved past needing to prove hierarchy because your aura already declares it. Those 5 traits together form something language can't cage. It's why people talk about you when you're not around. You occupy their analysis like a mental virus. They replay your responses, trying to find weakness, but all they discover is restraint. They revisit your rejection, trying to find ego, but all they meet is elevation. You've shattered their assumptions of what power looks like. They were taught power screams. You showed them it whispers with precision. They were told confidence needs display. You revealed it thrives in discretion. You turned self-respect into spectacle. And now they crave your composure the way addicts crave chaos. But it wasn't handed to you. You built it in the dark, brick by brick, failure by failure. You studied your own breakdowns until they became blueprints. You learned how to rebuild yourself quietly so that every comeback looked effortless. They call it luck because they don't have the discipline to track the labor behind your evolution. What they don't realize is that you've spent years auditing your own reactions, trimming excess energy, cutting emotional liabilities. You stopped seeking closure from people who only understood confusion. You stopped explaining your boundaries to people who benefit from crossing them. That's what created the aura they can't decode. It's the reflection of a soul that's done negotiating with mediocrity. And the deeper you stepped into that energy, the more they started projecting. They'll call you cold because you stopped being compliant. They'll call you detached because you stopped explaining. They'll call you intimidating because you stopped shrinking. But deep down, they know none of those words are accurate. What they're actually describing is your evolution. The version of you that used to justify everything died quietly, and what replaced it doesn't speak. It simply enforces. That's the part that rattles them. Because no matter how much they try to replicate your mindset, they can't mimic conviction built from solitude. They can't download discipline earned through failure. They can't reproduce the authority that comes from rebuilding yourself without applause. You've become their unsolved equation. Every time they see you, it triggers something primal. Admiration tangled with envy, curiosity tangled with fear. They'll study your posture, your tone, your rhythm, trying to reverse engineer presence, but presence can't be faked. Presence is spiritual gravity. You carry it because you've paid for it with perspective. You've turned every disappointment into data, every betrayal into calibration. You didn't just learn to move on, you learned to move smarter. And now, when you walk into spaces they thought they owned, the hierarchy glitches, not because you took their position, but because you revealed they never had one. And maybe that's the cruel part of growth. It exposes fragility disguised as confidence. You're not fighting people anymore. You're triggering their unhealed patterns just by existing. That's why the same people who once dismissed you now watch you in quiet study. They can't hate you effectively because hate requires certainty, and you've removed that. You've made them question what they know about power, about control, about worth. You've forced them into reflection they're not ready for. They can't escape it, because every time they compare themselves to you, they realize they've been living reactively while you've been moving architecturally, building reality, not begging for relevance. That's what makes you different. You don't chase outcomes, you construct them. You don't chase validation, you extract it from alignment. You've stopped trying to convince people because the evidence speaks louder than explanation ever could. Every achievement you manifest now feels like a forecast fulfilled. You saw it coming. You built it piece by piece while they were busy narrating doubt. You've learned how to make results your revenge, discipline your defense, and peace your proof. And the more you operate like that, the more the world around you starts reorganizing itself in your favor. That's not coincidence, that's consequence. So now they're restless. They can't label you, can't locate you, can't outthink you. You became too flexible to predict and too consistent to defeat. You're not reacting to them, they're reacting to you. They used to analyze your motives, now they analyze your mystery. Because deep down, they realize something they can't say out loud. You've evolved beyond comparison. You're not competing in their lanes anymore. You built your own infrastructure. You moved from participant to pattern, from reactive to revolutionary, from option to standard. And once someone becomes a standard, they stop being replaceable. That's why they'll keep talking, because talking is the only way they can feel close to something they can't control. They'll debate your personality, your choices, your success, your calm. But every conversation about you just reinforces your presence. You've become their mental bookmark, the thought they revisit when confidence runs out. You don't even have to interact anymore. Just existing in alignment with your truth keeps rewriting their perception of power. That's the real dominance, turning existence itself into influence. And as the nights get quieter and their thoughts start circling, they'll realize it wasn't luck, wasn't manipulation, wasn't coincidence. It was calibration. You built yourself with intention so relentless that it now echoes through their subconscious. Every time they try to explain you, they expose what they lack. Every attempt to define you becomes confession, because deep down, they know nothing about you was ever random. You were deliberate from the start. And as that realization hits them harder each day, the tension grows, not between you and them, but between who they are and who they pretended to be. You've become the living reminder that control doesn't come from domination. It comes from direction. They start feeling it now, the slow collapse of illusions they built around your image. Every rumor they tried to use against you backfires. Every doubt they threw your way becomes evidence of their short vision. They wanted to define you. Instead, you redefined them. Because the truth is, power like yours doesn't shout. It rearranges. The energy you carry doesn't just enter rooms. It rewrites atmospheres. And it's not mysticism, it's precision. You've built yourself through discipline, so calculated it's unnerving to people addicted to chaos. They mistake your restraint for arrogance because they've never seen control at this magnitude. They don't understand that when you stopped trying to be understood, you started becoming undeniable. And that's what shatters them most. The realization that you've become an example of what they could have been if they'd respected their own potential. They watch you walk through the same environments that broke them, untouched, and it breaks their internal compass. You're not surviving what they survived. You're mastering what they avoided. Every move you make exposes how small their excuses are. You've turned composure into a mirror that reflects cowardice in those who thought impulsiveness was strength. That's why they talk. It's not gossip, it's damage control. They whisper your name to dilute your impact, but all it does is amplify the authority behind your calm. You've shattered their mental structure because your 5 traits don't just exist individually. They operate like a unified algorithm. Your strategic unpredictability keeps them guessing. Your composure keeps them powerless. Your self-awareness keeps them transparent. Your selective intensity keeps them unprepared. Your authentic dominance keeps them obedient. You've turned personality into precision engineering. You're not improvising. You're calculating movement like a chess master who already mapped the board 5 turns ahead. And the crazy part? You make it look effortless. That's what really hurts them, because they work overtime to create illusions while you casually live in alignment. They chase applause. You chase architecture. They measure progress through attention. You measure through results. That's a frequency they can't match. Your unpredictability remains their biggest fear, not because they don't know what you'll do, but because they know whatever you do will work. They try to study your patterns, but there aren't any. You're fluid by design. You adapt without losing identity. You pivot without losing momentum. They move for validation. You move for calibration. That's the difference between playing and building. And it's why their strategies always collapse. They rely on predictability to feel safe, but safety doesn't exist around you. You've turned your next move into sacred territory. Every decision you make ripples across their ego because your success invalidates their shortcuts. And then there's your composure, the kind that terrifies impulsive souls. You don't chase revenge. You let results do it for you. You don't defend yourself. You upgrade yourself until explanations become obsolete. People can't stand that level of maturity because it exposes how emotionally dependent they are. Your calm is the most aggressive energy in the room because it forces accountability. You never need to raise your voice to dominate a conversation. Your tone already carries gravity. You mastered something they never will, the art of energetic authority. That's when they realize that self-control is the final form of power. But it's your ruthless self-awareness that finishes the job. You know your triggers, your shadows, your impulses, and that makes you untouchable. No manipulation works on someone who's already met themselves in the dark. You know when someone's trying to provoke you because you can feel the intent vibrating off their words. You read behavior like code. You spot motives before they become actions. That's what dismantles their confidence. They can't hide behind pretense when you already see the pattern beneath the performance. You've turned emotional intelligence into psychological warfare. People fear your awareness because it eliminates their advantage. You can't be played when you've already decoded the players. And your selective intensity, damn, that's the part that haunts them. You don't give energy to everything. You conserve it until it becomes weaponized. When you finally choose to move, it feels like destiny to them. Because you don't act often, but when you do, the ripple is permanent. That's what keeps them restless. They don't know when you'll strike, but they know it's coming. You've trained your attention to function like a sniper scope. Focused, lethal, deliberate. Every word you drop feels rehearsed by the universe itself. You've mastered scarcity in a world of excess, and that's what makes your power so rare. It's not loud, but it's final. Then comes authentic dominance, the trait that breaks the cycle completely. You're not trying to be superior, you just are. Not because of arrogance, but because you've integrated humility and confidence into one force. You've reached that stage where your existence instructs. You don't convince. You command presence through coherence. People feel safer when you lead because your leadership isn't performative. It's anchored. You've replaced intimidation with inspiration. But it still scares the fragile because they confuse stability for control. They think dominance means volume, but you've shown its vibration, the kind of energy that moves nations without a word. Every interaction you have now exposes fractures in people who thought they were stable. You've become a mirror with sharp edges. Anyone who stands too close without authenticity ends up bleeding ego. That's why they keep distance but can't look away. You're the contradiction their pride can't resolve. Soft-spoken yet powerful, detached yet magnetic, grounded yet ascending. You force them to rethink their definitions of worth. They used to think success was about appearance. Now they realize it's about alignment. You've made discipline fashionable again. You've made boundaries look like luxury. And that's the part that truly disarms them. The realization that your entire aura was built on decisions they keep postponing. Every trait you have is a product of consistency, not coincidence. They want your outcomes, but not your process. They want your strength, but not your solitude. They want your clarity, but not your accountability. They want your confidence, but not your self-confrontation. You've become the living embodiment of what happens when potential meets persistence without permission. You're proof that focus is the ultimate rebellion in a world addicted to distraction. Now they move differently around you. They speak softer, observe longer, pretend harder. Because when you've been exposed to real presence, fake confidence can't survive. You're not just influencing people anymore, you're recalibrating them. Even your silence feels instructional. You don't argue because arguments require equality of perception, and you no longer participate in misalignment. That's what they don't get. You don't win by fighting. You win by no longer being available for unnecessary wars. You've elevated beyond competition into contribution, and that transition is what their egos can't process. What they once called arrogance, they now call awareness. What they once called indifference, they now call peace. What they once called mystery, they now call mastery. They keep updating their vocabulary to justify your evolution because they can't keep up with your frequency. You've reached a point where your mere presence exposes what's fake around you. People can't pretend near you because authenticity is the atmosphere you breathe. And that's the real reason they can't explain you. You've removed the human habit of pretending. You're what they'd become if they stopped lying to themselves. They'll keep running mental laps trying to find a weakness. They'll try to paint you as detached, too calculated, too controlled. But deep down, They envy what they criticize. Because every accusation they throw at you is a confession. They're describing what they lack. You've become the unspoken standard. When people want to insult you, they subconsciously compliment you instead. He's too calm. Translation: I can't stay composed like that. She's too focused. Translation: I can't control my impulses. He's intimidating. Translation: I feel small next to that kind of alignment. Everything they say about you is just their reflection screaming. The truth is, you're not even trying to change them. You just exist authentically, and that alone rearranges dynamics. Because authenticity is confrontational to people who live behind performance. Your presence reveals patterns, exposes pretenders, and clarifies hierarchy without you saying a word. You've turned existence into influence, and influence into inevitability. They keep calling it luck because that's easier than admitting you earned it through ruthless self-mastery. You're not waiting for destiny, you're dictating it. Every step you take now sends data into the universe. Command received, trajectory adjusted, outcome inevitable. And yet through all this power, you're grounded. That's what they can't replicate. You don't need to dominate people, you dominate outcomes. You don't control others, you control response. You're not addicted to validation because you learned the truth early. Validation is rented, conviction is owned. They've spent their lives leasing confidence from attention, while you built equity through self-awareness. You don't need an audience anymore because your reflection became your accountability partner. That's what power looks like when it's matured. The shift happening now isn't about them losing. It's about them realizing they were never competing with you in the first place. You were always playing a different game, one that doesn't even have spectators, only participants capable of precision. You stopped living for reaction and started living from realization. That's why every attempt to knock you down ends up looking like a seminar in your strength. They tried to break you down, but all they did was remove distraction. They tried to expose you, but all they did was advertise your growth. They tried to block you, but all they did was make you more selective with your energy. Everything they intended for damage became data for dominance. And now, it's irreversible. You've evolved too far for regression. The version of you that needed approval has expired. The one that feared judgment got archived. The one that explained itself got deleted. What's left is the authentic architect of trajectory. You design direction now. You speak blueprint. You breathe order. They don't realize they're not watching your progress. They're witnessing their own limitations, because your growth forces them to confront every lie they told themselves about effort. You've become the walking reminder that mastery doesn't require permission, only persistence. So let them stare, let them speculate, let them struggle to find a frame wide enough to capture your evolution. Because no matter what they decide to believe, the conclusion remains the same. You've shattered the framework they thought reality followed. You've proven that emotional control can be lethal, that calmness can be commanding, that detachment can be divine. You've shown that the loudest victories happen quietly inside the mind of the disciplined. You are what happens when the soul graduates from survival to strategy. They can't admit it out loud, but you've rewritten their reference point for what power feels like. Before you, they thought strength came from shouting, from spectacle, from convincing crowds. You proved it's the opposite. You showed that true strength moves quietly, like tectonic plates, slow, steady, but world-shifting. Every inch of your composure carries consequence. They thought they could outwork you with noise, outshine you with performance, but energy doesn't lie. They spent years building identities for display, while you built an inner empire no one could invade. That's why they can't stop watching you. Your existence contradicts everything they were taught. You're proof that being unexplainable is the highest form of intelligence. Every person who once underestimated you now feels the weight of their own misjudgment. They thought they were analyzing you, but you were observing them. Every time they tested your patience, they revealed their insecurities. Every time they tried to provoke you, they showed you their programming. You collected it all like data, refining your reactions until they couldn't find any more buttons to press. That's what separates you. Your discipline is data-driven. Your emotional restraint isn't indifference, it's precision. You don't react to emotion, you respond to information. You don't speak to be heard, you speak to be remembered. That's why your words linger longer than their noise. See, most people exist as patterns, predictable, looping, reactive. You evolved into a design. You don't move until alignment hits. You don't rush because your rhythm doesn't require permission. You've made time your ally instead of your enemy. That's why your progress feels inevitable to them, because you've synced with patience in a world addicted to panic. Every goal you manifest now feels like it was scripted in advance. You built momentum quietly, and now you're unstoppable loudly. They can't explain how you do it because the explanation itself would require consciousness they haven't developed yet. Your 5 traits aren't just qualities anymore. They've become frequencies. You don't perform them, you embody them. Your unpredictability doesn't come from chaos, it comes from clarity, because you know yourself so deeply that nothing external can define your direction. You move with precision, and that precision terrifies those who live improvising reactions. Your composure feels unnatural to them, because they've only known emotional volatility as identity. You've made calm look like currency. Your self-awareness feels threatening because it removes the illusion of power others think they hold over you. They can't manipulate someone who's already navigated their own darkness. They can't guilt someone who's already forgiven themselves. And your selective intensity, it's the art form they'll never master. You've turned your focus into a weapon that hits targets before they even know they're exposed. You've taught the world that being unstoppable isn't about constant motion. It's about intentional precision. When you commit, it's irreversible. When you aim, it's exact. When you engage, it's final. That level of power doesn't shout. It shifts atmospheres. That's why people can feel your focus even when you're silent. It's the kind of energy that changes temperature in the room. They pretend not to notice, but their nervous systems already have. And that last trait, authentic dominance, that's the one they'll never crack. Because it's not something you put on, it's something you are. It's alignment so deep that the universe itself starts mirroring your movements. You've reached that stage where life responds to your conviction, like an algorithm tuned to confidence. You think it happens. You decide, it unfolds. You don't manifest through hope. You manifest through inevitability disguised as discipline. People confuse it for luck because they've never witnessed what happens when preparation meets precision at this level. You've stopped chasing outcomes because outcomes now orbit you. You see, dominance isn't about being above others. It's about being beyond comparison. You're operating from a place where nobody else's validation even fits the equation. You've learned that leadership isn't loud, it's lawful. It's a vibration of certainty that makes people adjust their posture when you enter the room. You don't demand authority, your existence issues it. They can sense that your energy doesn't seek approval, and that's what disrupts their hierarchy. Because in every social structure, dominance feeds on attention, but you've built a version of it that feeds on detachment. You don't need their spotlight. You are the architecture it stands on. That's why they'll never stop trying to analyze you. They'll read your posture, your tone, your timing, hoping to find the formula. But what they don't realize is, you are the formula. You're the proof that self-mastery is the final stage of evolution. You've taken the chaos of your past and turned it into choreography. Everything that once made you break now makes you bulletproof. You've taught your pain how to work for you. You've turned every betrayal into bandwidth. You've alchemized rejection into reach. You've built an empire from energy they wasted on explanations. And now, when they look at you, they don't see a person, they see a possibility. That's what frightens them most. Because possibility exposes limitation. You remind them that all their excuses were optional, that they could have built themselves too, but they chose validation over vision. That's why your success feels personal to them. It's their own reflection doing what they refused to do. They'll disguise envy as criticism, but you can hear the respect bleeding through their tone. You've reached that level of growth where even your haters start learning from you unconsciously. The truth is, you didn't set out to destroy their frameworks. You just decided to master yourself. And mastery is inherently disruptive. The world doesn't know what to do with people who can't be emotionally hijacked. When they can't control you, they call you distant. When they can't manipulate you, they call you cold. When they can't understand you, they call you dangerous. But all those words are translations for free. You've reached freedom at a frequency that feels threatening to the programmed. They live in reaction loops. You live in reflection. They live in explanation. You live in evidence. They live in gossip. You live in growth. And growth will always look like rebellion to those who've settled. So now, their narratives collapse. They can't box you because you don't fit. They can't frame you because you outgrew their language. You're an equation that updates itself mid-solution, and that's what drives them insane. You evolve too quickly to be contained. They'll try to replay your last chapter while you're already authoring the next volume. You've made transformation look like tradition. Every time they think they've seen your peak, you change altitude. You move like someone who's not trying to win anymore. Someone who already did. And that realization breaks them more than any confrontation could. Because you never needed to fight them. You just outgrew the battlefield. You turned self-awareness into armor, detachment into navigation, consistency into weaponry. You don't chase recognition because recognition follows precision. You've proven that presence itself is power when it's built on purpose. You've become their unspoken teacher, their reluctant guide, the mirror they didn't ask for but can't ignore. They can't delete your influence because your lessons were never verbal, they were vibrational. And maybe that's the most poetic part of your evolution, how your existence became instruction. You don't argue values, you embody them. You don't debate purpose, you demonstrate it. You don't seek loyalty, you inspire it. You've reached that rare point where you no longer compete for anything, because competition is confirmation that you still need comparison. You don't. You're beyond it. You're in the realm where peace itself becomes prestige. From the outside, they'll say you changed, but you know the truth. You simply returned. Returned to clarity, to command, to creation. You remembered who you were before they told you what to be. You refined every trait until it became weaponized wisdom, strategic unpredictability, emotional composure, ruthless self-awareness, selective intensity, authentic dominance. 5 pillars that don't just define you, they defend you. And the moment you embodied them, reality adjusted. The people who once overlooked you now orbit your energy like satellites around certainty. You've become the gravitational center of your own world. That's what happens when power stops pretending and starts existing. When control stops seeking and starts residing. When mastery stops speaking and starts emanating. They can't explain you because explanation requires reference, and you've become the reference. They can't stop you because stoppage requires access, and you've sealed the gates. You don't fight for peace anymore. You radiate it until everything unworthy dissolves. You don't prove worth. You embody value. You don't force outcomes. You flow with alignment that feels like prophecy. You've turned discipline into divinity, and divinity, Homie, never apologizes for precision. Now every eye that once doubted you can't look away. Every mouth that spoke against you now speaks about you. Every mind that tried to predict you now studies you. You've turned opposition into marketing, doubt into promotion, and confusion into worship. They're not just obsessed with you. They're orbiting the idea of who they could have been if they'd listened to the voice you never ignored. You didn't come to prove them wrong. You came to prove yourself right. And you did. Because when the dust settles and the world finally catches up to your rhythm, one truth will remain. The 5 traits that built you didn't just make you powerful, they made you untouchable. You've become a frequency too high for fear, too consistent for collapse, too disciplined for defeat. You've mastered the art of being the lesson disguised as a person, and that's why they can't explain you. That's why they can't stop you. Because you're not just evolving. You've evolved into the very thing evolution was meant to produce. A being who no longer adapts to the world but redirects it. And that, homie, is the moment everything changes forever.